Thank you, Madam Chair. This issue is an important one, and it's one that I had been in agreement with Dr. Weber. Dr. Weber asked us to just hold off. She asked us to wait a bit. When this item was initially docketed about a week ago, it has substantially changed from that point with the two bills. Right now, they had negotiations today, so we don't even know what the current status of it is. And Dr. Weber had asked we wait, but it is certainly the prerogative and the choice of those who brought this forward today, and I respect that choice, and that is within their power. And I think it's a good conversation. I think it's one that we should have. I think it's one we should have more often. I think there's a lot of voices that have been heard today that historically haven't been heard in this forum and in this place. And I think we're all in agreement that law enforcement is an incredibly difficult job. It is hard. I am a supporter of those who put their life on the line, who go to work every day to protect us all. I've never been a member of law enforcement, but as a United States Marine Corps combat veteran, I know what it's like to go into dangerous situations, to fear for your life. It is not a career for the faint of heart. But supporting law enforcement means that we have to examine and put in place the best policies to make them successful in the desire to protect and to serve. Even broader than the impact or implications for law enforcement as a society, we must constantly search for more efficient, more effective, more update policies that take into account the realities of the world we live in. We talk about being a more perfect union. That's an aspirational statement. We're on a path to become a more perfect union. And we have to do that every day. I think that a lot of the issues that we hear before us today are broader and bigger than just a use of force policy. I don't think as a society and a country we have ever reconciled or addressed the original sin baked into the founding of our country. And I think today's discussion is about one aspect of that. But the reality is, if we're going to be honest about the public policy decision before us, we have to be honest about issues that are larger than law enforcement, because law enforcement deals with the impact and effect of the entire society. We're seeing a fundamentally different conversation today about treatment for those that are addicted. Fundamentally different. There is almost universal agreement that those suffering from addiction, they need treatment, and they're sick. And the simple reality is that's because the opioid crisis hit white people. But it is, and it's not meant to be a divisive statement, but that's the reality. Because decades ago,
Please, Supervisor, let's wait a minute. Please, out of respect for the supervisor, could you please restrain yourselves? Supervisor Fletcher,
yes,
I know it's hard, but please.
But decades ago, we had an addiction crisis. And the answer proposed was 3 strikes and was lock them up. And today we have an addiction crisis. And the answer, and it's the right answer today is right. We should provide treatment. These are folks who are ill, and they need help. But we should just be honest about the underlying basis of why those two are looked at differently. You know, when you look at the disparity, crack and cocaine are the same drug. It's the same drug. But yet, for the longest time in our country, the exact same amount of crack got you 100 times longer sentence than the exact same amount of powder cocaine. And we know the reality of why that was. Because white people use powder cocaine. And people of color were using crack. And the federal government recognized that. And they said, that's not right. That's not equitable. That's not fair. That's not a more perfect union. And so they changed the federal sentencing guidelines. So now it's about 20 to 1. It's not 100 to 1. But it is better. It's not 1 to 1, but it's better. But it's not just issues in public safety. We talk about air quality issues. A child in Barrio Logan is 8 times more likely to have asthma than a child in La Jolla. Now, if it was the inverse, we would spend more time talking about air quality. That's just a fact. If Carmel Valley had 8 times higher asthma rates than Barrio Logan, we would spend more time talking about that. And I think these issues, they go deeper than that. When I was in the private sector, a dear friend of mine, Howard Wright, we got on the plane, we were traveling in business class, and we walk on, and someone asked him, "Are you a basketball player? Are you a professional basketball player?" And he said, "No, I'm a senior vice president at my company." And I said, "Howard, do you get that a lot?" And he said, "I get it every time I get in business class." Because how could a black man be in business class if he wasn't an athlete? I see it with my wife. My wife and I will go to dinner with people that I've known my whole life. And the first question they ask her is, "Where did you go to school?" And I say, "Well, you've never asked me that, ever. Why would you ask her that?" Because she's a woman of color and she has to prove that she belongs. And it's uncomfortable and we don't like talking about these things. But in America, African-American men are 6.5% of the population, unless it's in prison, and then it's 40%. And we see the legacies of redlining that continues to pervade our land use issues. And, you know, in each of these instances, not everyone making that is a racist and has evil in their heart, but there's an implicit bias that is baked into every decision we make. And when we don't confront these realities and when we're not honest about the situations, and we don't think what are things we can do to improve our state of mind, then we're inconsistent with that desire to be a more perfect union. And I'll be honest, I don't know. I don't understand a lot of the struggles I heard because it doesn't happen to me. But I hear you, and I know it's real. I live in a mixed-race house. I have a black daughter. Her life is fundamentally different than my white boys. And I see that, and I know that. And I don't discount that. I give great credence to that. And so I think we have to all be willing to examine the situations and the facts in front of us. And when we look at a policy choice as a statement of values, is it okay every 150 years to revisit a policy? A policy that was put in place when California was the Wild West. A policy that was put in place when women couldn't vote. A policy put in place almost 100 years before African Americans could vote. And when we look at that, I think we have to look at the realities of the current situation. And I do not believe that there is a single peace officer, not a single one, that goes to work and says, "Today I'm going to kill an unarmed person." I don't believe that's true. I don't believe there's a single officer who goes to work and says, "Today I'm going to shoot a person of color." I don't believe that. But I believe that we have broader societal problems that get baked into our existence and our way of being, and I think we have to examine those, and we have to say, is there a better way? It's been mentioned, the 2017 report from the Department of Justice, where 3/4 of those who were shot were people of color. It's not 3/4 of felonies. It's not 3/4 of the population. We know that black people are 3 times as likely to be shot than white people. We know that 3/4 of those who were unarmed were people of color. We've heard from parents who have to have different conversations with their children than others do about the reality of the situation and about what we're going through. We also know that we can do better. And we know this not because what's being proposed is experimental or revolutionary. We know this because there's other jurisdictions that have done things very similar. We know officer-involved shootings, 151 from 2015 to 2017. It went down in 2018. That's good. I think the awareness of these issues is good. But our current standard is police can use deadly force whenever an objectively reasonable officer would have done so under the circumstances, regardless of whether there was an immediate threat to life or bodily security or whether there were available alternatives. Under the current standard, these actions can only be viewed with the information the officer had at the time. The proposed standard in AB 392 authorizes police officers to use deadly force only when it is necessary to prevent imminent and serious bodily injury or death, that if given the totality of circumstance there was no reasonable alternative to use deadly force, including warnings, verbal persuasion, and other non-lethal methods, these actions can also only be considered with the information the officer had at the time. Under AB 392, you don't get the benefit of hindsight. The hang-up that we're stuck on here is necessary versus reasonable. And I spent time on this bill. I looked at what has happened in other areas. Illinois has adopted a standard that includes the words necessary. Adjusted for their smaller state population, they have less than half of the amount of shootings as we do. New York uses the term necessary. Adjusted for a smaller state population, they had 22% of the number of shootings that California did. Connecticut uses the word necessary. Adjusted for their smaller state population, they had 24% of the shootings we had. Philadelphia changed the standard to one when no alternative exists. After the policy was adopted, shootings dropped 67% within 1 year and remained at the lower rate moving forward. Closer to home, San Francisco changed its use of force standard, again using the word necessary. And in 2016, 1 year after the new regulation took place, the city reported a 20% decline in use of force instances. Lieutenant Mario Molina with the San Francisco Police Department stated, "We have seen a decrease in the use of force. We have a decrease in officers getting hurt." Stockton Police Department adopted something similarly consistent with this effort. They went from 11 shootings in 2015-2016 to 3 shootings in 2017-2018. Seattle updated its use of force policy, again utilizing necessary, and has steadily experienced extraordinarily low rates of instances. In Seattle, de-escalation tactics have improved officer safety. A study in Seattle showed no increase in officer injury and showed that as more force was used, officers became injured. Chicago changed to a standard that included the use of the word necessary, and last year a report showed after the policy change, complaints against officers were down, officer-involved shootings are down, use of force instances are down. Each of those has some differences from AB 392, but they all use the term necessary. This isn't radical. This isn't experimental. This is a best practice. None of those departments adopted the constitutional minimum of the Supreme Court. They went further. Recruiting and retention is a national problem in law enforcement. It's a national problem. And I think we could go a long way towards addressing our recruiting and retention problem if we take common sense, reasonable steps to begin to restore, to build trust between those that police and the communities that are policing. If we want to lower the danger of lawsuits, we sit in closed session every week. We get sued all the time now. If you want to lower the danger of lawsuits, then you should take action to lower the use of force. I agree, training is vital. Last year, $25 million was put in the budget for training, but you train to the standard. And if you don't change the standard, then more training won't have the desired effect. This is an issue of respect. This is about respect for law enforcement. This is about respect for the difficult job that they do. This is about respect for the fact that every one of those departments I mentioned that saw reductions in the use of force, that saw reductions in the number of shootings, none of them went out and recruited an entirely new crop of officers. It was the same folks with a different standard and with different training, which tells you where the problem lies. It's not with the individual officers. It's with the systems we put in place. And this is also about respect for the community. It's about respect for those families who have an experience and a perspective and a daily life that is fundamentally different than mine, but one that I can understand and one that I can speak to. In closing, I spent a decade in the Marine Corps, and other than the order of our ceremony at the Marine Corps birthday, we strive to continually change. We don't adhere to 150-year-old policies. We adapt to changes. In one combat deployment, we changed the use of force during that. We went from hostile intent to hostile action, a fundamentally different change, and we were able to adapt. We were able to change. We were able to fulfill our mission. I do believe that we do best by putting in place policies that acknowledge the reality of the circumstances in our community, that take into account best practices, that take into account how we equip and train and empower our officers to hold true to the true spirit of to protect and to serve. This bill will not solve all of our societal problems. They are much bigger than this one issue. But it will show that we understand and we're serious about moving forward, and I support AB 392. And I hope Dr. Weber and the negotiations going forward can be fruitful, and I hope that we can pass something that not only has the support of the community, but has the support of law enforcement so that we can all move forward together. Thank you.